Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Wednesday evening class with Guy Finley. Waiting just a second here to get confirmation from my team that I'm, okay, good. So you can hear me everywhere? All right, thumbs up. Great, thank you. So yes, hello, welcome. My name is Kate, and you are here on our Wednesday, Self-Discovery Wednesday class with Guy. If this is your first time, the format for tonight is that in just a moment, Guy will come on and give a 1-hour talk. We'll take a short 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for part 2 of class, which is an open dialogue, discussion, Q&A time with everyone here in the room, everyone online. So hopefully you can stay for the whole class. If not, we do record these sessions, and they go up on all of our social media replay channels. So you'll find those after class as well, and you can go back and listen anytime. Couple little things here for you in the room. If you have a cell phone that you brought in with you, please check it and make sure that it's off. For you online, if you have any tech issues during the broadcast, just let us know in the question area, the chat area, depending on where you are. You can send an email to support@guyfinley.org, and I will do my best to help you. We're ready to get started. So I'm going to start things by reading the title for tonight's class and the key lesson that Guy wrote for us, and then I'll hand it over to him. The title for tonight is Step Out of the Rush and Into a New World Within You. And here's the key lesson. In time, with enough struggle and effort, we can make of ourselves a momentary ruler of whatever kingdom we set out to create, but only when and as we learn what it means to rule ourselves do we lose nothing when that kingdom fades away, as must all creations in time.
All I see is a microphone. I don't want to see him. Let's stay sharp, everybody. As a precursor to the material I want to cover with you tonight, and we're going to actually have an in-the-room exercise before we're done. So I'll prepare you in advance. Have some object, small, that you are prepared to carry with you when you leave your chair. Somewhere near the end of the talk, you'll understand what that is. And you at home, I would urge you to do the same thing. It's not elaborate, it's not complicated. I just want to help make an imprint using your body and your mind so that you can see clearly the impression intended from the material we're going to cover. But here's what I would say to you. In a perfect world, I suppose we wouldn't have talks at night. Most human beings, by the time the sun starts to set, have squandered everything they've been given that morning. All their daily bread is either thrown away or foolishly consumed in wasted thoughts and activities. And at least you should know that much about yourself so that when you come here, instead of being negative and blaming that you have to go somewhere that you're not really sure you want to go, you start to understand what you really don't want to be is you at the end of the day. Because you've been a weight. You don't know what a weight you are on your own shoulders, carrying the world that only exists as you've imagined it, and then fighting with that world to keep in place a security that you've imagined, and all without knowing it's going on, and all to the point of this talk tonight, to continue our study that I began on Sunday, which is always a continuation of every meeting, on useless suffering. Do you know that not wanting to be tired is useless suffering? You just tire yourself out not wanting to be tired. Resistance drains. It never delivers. It never encourages. It never uplifts. You need to understand that about your own psychology. And that's a lot of what we're going to look at, this idea of useless suffering as connected to a particular idea We will build a list together, a short one. We will cover, I think, 2 or 3 special key lessons and a dedicated exercise. We have a lot to do. What are you wasting your time on? As most of you know, I'm a bit of a naturalist. I love nature. I have a wonderful relationship with literally a farmyard of wild creatures who are my daily visitors several times a day. Not because they love me. I'm not that foolish. But some of them do trust me. And that's important. Not because I, in quotes, can establish trust between myself and a natural creature, but because how else would a natural creature ever learn that human beings, that all of them aren't the hellish creatures that most human beings are around animals? So to the point, there's one young buck, I call him Little Buck. He's just a 1.5-year-old. He's got his first one horn with 2 little prongs. And right now he's the king of the roost because all the big, like for instance, Big Buck, Big Dog, he's out doing whatever Big Dog does, getting ready for all the jousting that's going to go on. So right now Little Buck kind of rules the roost. And I was watching him yesterday. I'm so grateful for the time and space to be able to live in relationship with a natural world that naturally educates the soul willing to participate in its movement. He was out there, and we have a woodshed that we keep our wood in. Actually, it was originally placed for a couple horses, but stuffed with firewood now. And Little Buck has carved himself out with his paw a place to lay down right in the door of where the woodshed is. So I was watching him yesterday, and he was over there, and he was looking around the Tammy and Tata and Tammy and little Tito, the little buck that belongs to Tata. They were all there. There are about 10 or 12 of them. They're all milling around, and Little Buck's kind of looking around. And then he decides he's going to create a little softer space for his body to lie in. You've seen dogs do that, yeah. So he does that. And then I'm thinking, well, you know what? He's getting ready to lay down. I like to watch him lay down. It's like a Bambi moment for me. They fold their legs under like this, and they look so comfortable. I wish I could be that comfortable in my own bed. And he carves out a space, and then I'm thinking he's going to fold up, but he doesn't. Then he turns around and goes to the other side. He carves out a little bit more. And then I think, well, surely he's going to lay down now. No. Now he starts looking around up in the sky like this. He grooms himself a little bit. Then he returns and he digs a little more. And I'm thinking, come on, man. I'm waiting for you to lay down. There's no urgency in a natural creature. What a blessing it is to be able to live as one is capable of spending time where creatures are a living example. Imagine a deer as an example of how a human being should live. He's not in any hurry. Finally, like 5 minutes later, he groomed himself. He looked around, scratched a little bit, went out and smelled something on the ground, wanted to decide if it was something to eat, and then he went and just folded himself up and laid there. If you watch nature, her creatures all move like the hands of 1,000 billion clocks. Every one movement here is causing another movement, every movement creating a space someplace else for something to happen. In this beautiful celestial, as I'm concerned, circulation that I talk to you about so often, it's just evident there in nature. And it's not just Tito and Tata and Little Buck and all the rest of them. It's everything that's taking place. It's the movement of the sun, it's the shadows, it's the light, it's the temperature, and all of it moves perfectly. There's no rush in nature. There's no rush in nature. Now, obviously, if Little Buck or any of them, or any of the turkeys, if Frankie's sitting there and all of a sudden there's a noise, big branch fell down from one of the trees near the barn where we are today. But see, even that rushing is a preservative. It's preservation. It doesn't mean that they are urgent. It means that they are in a movement with everything else that is moving at that speed. Now, I'm saying this to you because I want to get across to you this idea, is that Little Buck isn't thinking about what does it mean to be productive. Do you understand that? His being is part of the great product of nature. It fulfills itself moment to moment. It is part of what is fulfilling nature moment to moment. And Little Buck is perfectly productive, beautifully productive. And part of the reason that there's no urgency in any of these creatures is because they're all a participant in a grand divine production. It's as if there is a conductor of some kind that we would never be able to see, whose very fabric permeates every molecule of space, and everything moves without urgency in it. What about us? Do you know that you spend your day trying to be productive? Do you know that about yourself? Well, what do you think you're thinking about all the time? What wasn't productive? What needs to be productive? So if I'm productive enough, I'll have a positive experience. And if I have enough positive experiences, I won't have to deal with any pain, and therefore I'm a productive human being. The prodigal son thought he was very productive when he left home. So I want to get into this with one simple idea. There is a passage, most of us know it, but we're going to look still a little more deeply at it. You know it. What man taking thought can what? Add 1 cubit to his or her stature. Christ said the words. Here's a literal translation of it. What human being anxious and rushing to create or otherwise protect who and what that human being imagines himself as being, does so in order to remain as they've imagined without any challenges. That's what the anxiety is the endless sense that who and what I am is facing some existential threat or something that I have completely, instantly identified with as the object threatening the subject of my security. And a man or a woman spends most of their life doing what? Now here's a problem. I got to get in before I go any further. Some of you have a suspicion that you're an anxious mess. Some of you do. But even those of you that know what a wreck you are, always rushing, you don't know when you're rushing. You have no idea that you are caught up in a stream of thoughts that have captured your attention so completely that all you can see is what you need to do to get free of whatever it is that you're trying to escape, or get more of what you imagine will make you safe. That's the whole 9 yards for human beings. I tell you, with God as my witness, and one day may you witness it yourself, and may I see it deeper myself. You're always in a state of urgency. Honest to God, you don't know it. You're always in a state of urgency, but you're completely blind to it because thought is always trying to mitigate the emergency it has created through comparison to a condition it says shouldn't be the way it is. Do you know, I don't have the science to back this up, but it's pretty evident. First of all, most human beings over the age of 75 have to take a psychotropic drug just to deal with life. And a lot of why they have to take these drugs, and a great deal of it has to do with the fact that their adrenals are completely shot. This is a 21st century epidemic that nobody wants to talk about, except eventually they will, with social anxiety disorder and things like that. So they can sell you a drug that'll bypass the adrenals and just give you a sense that everything's fine, and they'll bury you as the large zucchini that you were and spent your life in the garden of your imagination. If you understand any of this, it requires a question. What does it really mean to be a productive human being? Am I meant to be a productive human being? What is the nature of productivity? And if I can even ask that question, what is it within me, what is it within you that believes that you can rush in some way or another to free yourself from anxiety? Because we don't see what starts it out. All there is some kind of disturbance that's registered at a completely unconscious level. And that unconscious disturbance surfaces, having named through comparison something it says has challenged its confidence and security. And then it gets all in an urgent state, trying to resolve something that only exists because a dream has been disturbed and the human being has no idea that that's the case. Can you free yourself from anxiety by rushing? Let me ask you a question. How many of you rush? And you don't have to even be moving to be rushing. I don't know if you're aware of that. Rushing isn't just what your body's doing. Rushing is what moves your body. You think you move your body. You do not move your body. Not one of you moves your body. We're going to learn a little bit more about that this evening. Because you can't even begin to be able to be with movement of your body until you first see that your body is moving against your own best interests all the time, because something is pushing and pulling on you to get you to go somewhere and be something where at last you'll be free of this pain, this disturbance. So here's a quick story. A good Samaritan, just like in the scripture. I was talking with a man yesterday, passing friend, and something came up that we were talking about, and I said to him, this isn't the story, by the way. I said, because I had to say something to him, I wanted to know if he would be receptive. I said, are you a religious man? Boy, there was this cold pause, and a hem and a haw. And he said, well, I don't know what you mean by religious. I said, I don't think I mean what you think it means. I said, do you think that there is a relationship that a human being has with a greater system that is always acting on that human being in order to support and encourage that human being to develop what we would call their higher life, their soul? That's what I like, he said. Yeah, that's what I think. So here's a good Samaritan, like out of the Bible. It isn't the Bible that ruined the stories. The stories, the parables, the teaching that's given by any awakened human being it's a beautiful thing. It's objective in the moment that it's given, because it's outlining a scale and a level that is at everything. Then it becomes what this man was afraid of. He thought I was going to ask him, well, do you believe, are you this, that? Because he said, I'm terrified of stuff like that. I said, you should be. Good Samaritan, he walking along, and he looks down in a pit. And he sees at the bottom of the pit, there's this man all bent up and crumbled in on himself, obviously bruised. And the pit was off to the side of the road there. And the Samaritan yells down, you all right down there? Yeah. He says, hold on, I'll get a rope. The Good Samaritan does what a Good Samaritan would do. He doesn't just leave the guy down there. I want to give a whole talk on a Good Samaritan now, but I don't have time. He brings the guy up, and he says, geez, you want me to take you over to the emergency care? He said, no, I can't afford it. He didn't say that, I'm just ad-libbing. He said, no, I'm all right. He said, well, let me ask you a question. How did you walk into the pit? I mean, the road here is at least 8 feet wide. How did you walk off of this path into that pit? I don't mean any offense. And the man who had been fallen, he said, I guess I never saw it. The Samaritan says, again, no disrespect, how's that possible? I mean, what were you looking at while you were walking along this road that's 8 feet wide, that you wouldn't see the pit off to the left? And the man looked at him with a kind of a sheepish grin and said, I don't really remember what I was looking at. How many of you fall into a pit? Do you understand the little point of that story? Here I'm walking along. I'm going to lunch someplace. I'm sitting at my desk. I'm going to the kitchen to get a glass of water. I'm headed from one office into another. And somewhere within a space of 5, 6, 7 feet, I might even be walking out of a pit into another pit. In a heartbeat, I have fallen into a state where I am in pain because something has transpired that I didn't see, and I fell. It's the proper use of the word. I fell into conflict with life. I fell into something where I was opposed to where I was going or to what was coming at me. So I want to bring you in quickly now, and everybody watching me. Let's bring up the study list, and you'll understand why we're going to this as quickly as we are. Name some time or place in your life where, being anxious or in a rush of some kind, you fell into a painful problem, painful relationship you didn't see coming because of where you were in such a hurry to get to. Name some time or place in your life where, for being anxious or in a rush of some kind, you fell into a painful problem you didn't see coming because of where you were in such a hurry to get to. Deb. Not inaccurate. She said, the first time I got married, there I was walking along, and I thought that the pit was a prince, meaning I fell into what I couldn't see, what was right in front of my eyes. Who else? John. The first and every time I got dumped. Okay, John. Look, maybe I should give you an example. Barbara, there's a good one. I'm with somebody and I start telling them how they should be and what they need to do so that they can be more like me, essentially. The minute that you start out that way, do you not see where you have to get to in a hurry, urgently, to escape the pain of whatever that person is that you're blaming that relationship on for the moment? Do you understand that? Who else has that's a good example? Terry. She said buying something online without reading the fine print. How about just buying anything that I don't need? How many people today do you think are over their heads in debt because they're in a rush to find a pleasure of some kind to escape a pain they don't recognize, so they're running from a pain in order to find a pleasure and fall in the pit of having to pay for what that nature decided to do? Dana. That's another one. She said, interrupting people when they're speaking. Talk about being an urgent. I can't let you finish what you're saying because I'm already irritated with you. Or I already know better than you do. Rebecca says, my choice of college education and career. Okay, look, the retrospective is fine and I get it. But I'm looking for where is it every single day. How about this one? Name some place that you don't see where you fall in the pit. How about sitting in your chair and a thought says, cupcake? A thought says, that idiot, why was he like that? Thought says, oh my God, What's going to happen in 2 weeks from now? The whole world is at risk. Oh no. In that moment, you are picked up exactly like a leaf in the wind. And you are carried without you knowing that you've gotten out of your chair. Without you having no sense at all of the suffering that's involved in the conflict you have with what should be as opposed to what you think it ought to be. So that in that moment, there's no real you doing anything. There is something that has come along, acted on you without you knowing it. A reaction has taken place. And as soon as that reaction formulates itself, it begins to point to the road you have to take to free yourself from the pain of your own reaction. Can you see it? And it's always urgent, isn't it? Claudia says second guessing. Sure. John, judging another without really knowing them. Yeah, of course. Judgment is always a form of falling in a pit. And it's always urgent, meaning, and try to see this, there's no you that judges someone. There's an instantaneous reaction where you feel threatened, and the protection that nature that reacted knows to do is to urgently find a way to explain to itself what's wrong with you that's causing me to feel this way. Yes or no? John. Debbie, stop challenging John. Someone challenges me as being wrong. Yeah, no, this is a perfect example. How many of you like it when somebody even intimates that you have the wrong side of that discussion? What happens inside of you? Is it not instantaneous defensiveness? And the instantaneous defensiveness is seen as something that is urgent because I'm at risk. Who I am is actually at risk because you said that I've gained weight. Patricia. Well, we all have our cross to bear. Patricia said, anytime I get an unsolicited phone call, I become an instantaneously unpleasant human being. I know you do. Because that person should not be interfering with where I'm going, who I think I am, and how things should be. So that the minute the agitation is there, the urgency to escape the experience of the agitation overwhelms everything, and all I see is what's ahead of me, failing to see that I'm fallen in a pit because I am blinded by my own reactions and the rush that they always involve. Everybody got that? I can't spend any more time on this. I think we have a pretty good notion here. Nick says, explaining myself to someone. That's a pretty good example, isn't it? And Isabella, trying to make sure others are happy with me. Talk about a bottomless bucket. Isabella, listen to me. This is free. No one's happy with themselves. So why do you want someone who can't stand himself to be happy with you? Unsolicited advice. So, everybody kind of see where all this is going? So now I'm going to bring up the key question, please. This is the setting the tone for the talk with the rest of the material. Read along with me. What does it say? If I'm not in my own body, looking out at the world around me through my own eyes, then in whose body am I? And what exactly is it looking for? Can I fall in a pit if I'm in my own body? If I'm looking at the world around me and I can see the evidence of all these conditions that are so familiar to me and have conflict in them, how can I fall in a pit? Unless whoever it is that's there in that moment isn't I at all. That can't be my eyes, because if I were my eyes, how many of you would deliberately jump into a pit? Would you? Never. But you fall into a pit, don't you? We just listed about 20 of them. So this is an extraordinary question, one that most of us aren't even prepared to even start dealing with, but that this work is going to gradually and intimately bring you into asking yourself, well, I just said that cruel thing. I just almost drove off the road. I just got caught in an argument with somebody that's dead, and I'm rushing to resolve it. Whose body am I in? whose mind is talking to me, whose eyes are looking out and seeing a threat. Because if they really could see a threat, they would see that when I take my eyes off of where I am in that moment, I'm in danger. Because the only thing that would take its eyes off of the whole of oneself is something that's divided from oneself, trying to find a way to make itself whole in a time and place to come. Urgently, I might add. Everybody still tracking? Who's I know it's not important enough yet to you, but that's okay. It will. I get out of my chair to go get a glass of water. On my way to get a glass of water, I stub my toe on a fireplace. Then I get mad at the fireplace and forget that I went to get a glass of water and instead start eating ice cream. And then I get a stomach ache because the ice cream isn't good for me at 4 a.m. in the morning or whatever. And you can just see one pit leads to another pit, and nobody even suspects that the first pit, meaning the first part of themselves that got captured, never knew it got captured. Who is it that's looking through my eyes? It may have never occurred to you, but when you feel, and I'm hoping you'll put this together, when you feel, if I said to you, the spur of fear, how many of you know what the spur of fear is? Cowboys wear spurs. Terrible, I think, personally. Cowboys wear spears. Wear spurs. And when you feel that spur of a fear, or have you ever felt the spur of the need for a piece of chocolate? Yes or no? The spur for pleasure. The spur to buy myself something, to go somewhere. That's a spur. It's just not the spur of a pain or a fear. It's the spur of what seems to be a pleasure, yes or no? But if there's something spurring me, I don't hear it, but something inside of me is going, giddy up, yahoo, yeehaw, go man, go. We're burning daylight, go man, go, giddy up. And I don't know. First, can you see that, yes or no? So if that's taking place, am I the rider or am I the horse? I'm asking you to see it. I know this. I'm asking you to see it. Here I am, and something in myself, something says, oh, Jesus, God. Something spurred me. Now, there was no me that was spurred. There was no separate sense of self sitting there that feels itself being spurred by a fear or the pursuit of some ambition. But boy, just like that, the spurs get in there, giddy up, and then I think I'm the rider. I think I have the reins. Don't you think you have the reins in your hand? You think you're going giddy up? No, you're the horse. You're that body of unconscious thoughts and feelings, themselves spurred into existence by a reaction that can't resolve itself. Given what it is, it has to find a reason for itself. And so the next thing a human being knows is that he's running, she's running after whatever it wills. Doesn't your mind run after what your mind tells you you have to track down and put to rest? Doesn't your mind tell you that? Do you think to yourself, how can my own mind spur me? But you see, the reason it makes sense to us that it does it is because when we get the spur, a sense of self comes up that can explain to itself from the content of its own past why it is that it has to take that path with the urgency it does. So it looks away from the moment to explain the pain of the moment, and as it looks away from the moment, it runs towards what it's imagined will free it, and it's blind. And then it goes into a pit. And here's the thing. It's difficult to explain this in certain terms. The pit you fall to isn't in passing time. This consciousness contains its own pit. This level of consciousness is the pit. It's the pits. It's an expression from the 60s. Let's bring up the second key lesson, please. Read along with me. Despite the seeming paradox in the following insight, real self-command begins with a shocking discovery. Not only are we not in charge of our own life as we imagine, but that until we're awakened to see this as fact, and so begin to deliberately struggle with all that this revelation infers, an unconscious nature remains in command of us. That's the last thing anybody wants to see. You and I look at life as a place where there's some command and not command, where others can command us because what we want from them, and where it is that we command others because of what they want from us. And so we're in an endless negotiation, all in thought, all in imagination, trying to figure out one way or another how it is that if I can just struggle through this particular deal, if I can just get into that, get through this again, hurry up, then I'll be free and I'll have my own life back the way it was before, and everything's going to be great. And what you don't see is that the life you get back when you rush is the life that rushed to escape itself. You don't see that. Because why? Simple question. Can there really be a me, a you? Can there really be a me that if I start running, that I remain unaware of what it is that is pushing me? When you start running towards something, you have a very strong sense of self, don't you? But the strong sense of self that is derived when you're in an urgent state, no matter how simple it may be, because we looked at a lot of different ways, when I'm feeling that kind of urgency, I'm never more real than I am in that moment. Isn't it true? And if I'm so real, what am I doing in a pit? I bring this up. Would you deliberately run off of a cliff? What if you saw your brother do it? My mother used to say. No, I don't want to run off of any more cliffs. And you run off of a cliff every time something tells you that you have to rush and get through something in order to protect who and what you've imagined yourself to be. Every single time, without exception. To even begin how this is, understanding how it's possible, we're going to have to look at something together. Now I ask you, I'll bring you in. How is it possible that I can be at home, or I can be in my car, or I can be at work, at a restaurant? How is it even possible that in a moment I can go from being someone maybe comfortable, complacent, from someone like that into someone who is urgent, stressed, and anxious, and not see it? Do you understand? This is the point. See, people say, why are you negative? I'm not negative. This is the most positive thing you'll ever be asked. How is it that when I'm negative, anxious, and rushing, I don't know that I'm negative, anxious, and rushing? Who can tell me? How is it I don't know that? John? John said, all I can see is what the mind is pointing to. That's a pretty good answer. Anybody else want to venture something here? Deb? I believe what I'm being told. I always have, and I don't want to do that anymore. These thoughts and these anxious feelings that are rushing through us are invisible to us. They're invisible to us. Now, they're not meant to be invisible to us, but they are, in fact, invisible, so that when they start, as they do, to race, I just run with them. I just run with them, like the running of the bulls. Speaking of insanity, I just run with them. I'm driving in my car. I turn on the radio, and then here comes that song, "Papa was a Rolling Stone." That's my favorite. And then I go, my dad, what a jerk he was. And the next thing I know, I'm running with the bulls. I'm running with the thoughts and feelings that are urgently looking for a way to escape the pain of my own memory. But that I don't see is my own memory, because my memory says that moment was real and I need somehow or other to rush, get back, change that so I don't feel this pain anymore. And yet there I am in a pit experiencing the very pain that I say I want to escape. Please, yes or no? Okay, how am I doing? When did we start? At 6? 38 minutes, oh boy. Okay, got to move along. So, we have an idea of the problem that we're looking at, yes? So, if we have an idea of what the problem is, what do you think the solution is if I'm always in this state of urgency, rushing? What's the solution? Pat said, don't do it. Yeah, stop it. Yeah, no, that doesn't work, does it? Come back into our body, Chris says. Look and see what's talking to us. No. Steve. Entertain the idea that what's talking to us isn't us. Look, you have all these ideas. And how are they doing when that horse starts to carry you off, when you're the horse, not the rider? I'm still the horse, aren't I? I don't know I'm a horse. Of course. I don't know I'm a horse, because the horse is divided up into what it imagines the rider is. So wherever it's going, it says the rider has the reins and is choosing this direction to go in. And at this speed, that's what it says. So if that's really the problem, what is the actual solution? Not one that you intellectualize. What would be the actual solution for a person who starts to recognize, you know what? I think I'm on a horse holding the reins, choosing to go this way and that way, spurring it to get there faster. I think that's what it is, but I'm starting to see that's not true. What would have to be the answer? You know it already. It's just too difficult to say. No. I have to slow down. I have to slow down. You run with the thoughts. You don't even think to yourself you're running with thoughts, because the thoughts are telling you if you run with them far enough, you'll be free of the disturbance of all the thinking that you're doing. It never ends. I have to slow down. But here's the issue. If you've even tried, I know some of you have tried, probably not very extensively, but what happens when I slow down? Why don't I try to slow down? If rushing, anxiety, all of that is the constant proof of a pain I don't see, prodding me, spurring me, why is it that I don't work every single day to slow down? John, that's pretty much it. It's too damn painful. It's just too damn painful to slow down. And yet, and you have to ask the question, if you've been following me, to whom is it that painful? To whom does that pain belong? To the horse. To that unconscious nature that without you knowing it has not only decided where it is and what's taking place, all based on comparison, but in that comparison and the conflict inherent in being challenged by the moment, rushing, always rushing, if nothing else in thought, to get to some place where it's not troubled by its own thinking. And so it thinks to escape its pain by imagining a time and place when it gets there, thought won't have gone with it there. How can I slow down? This is what I'm leaning to. How can look, you're going to, and not because I say so, one day if you're ever going to be a free human being, or at least have an inkling of the possibility of a life like Little Buck, Taking your time where you are and allowing where and what you are in that moment to dictate to you what it is that you are meant to be and do. And if I'm ever going to have a life like that, I'm going to have to figure out how to slow down. Now, most of us have tried slowing down. We've had exercise. I'm going to give you a new way to understand slowing down. That's what this whole talk is about. That isn't dedicated to this idea, and I hear it sometimes in the study groups. Well, like last week, and don't, if you said this, please don't go into dreams and leave the room in your mind. I'm not going to say the word I. It's a great exercise, but if you think the purpose is you sitting there and watching for the word I, so you don't say it, and if you don't, at the end of it, you go, wasn't that great? That's not what the exercise is. The exercise of not saying I is to notice how strong the tendency is with everything that you do to say I to it. How there's a sense of self derived from everything. That's the point of the exercise, not to succeed as a human being, but to recognize the machine, the horse that only knows the course it takes, and it's always ridden by a certain I that thinks it holds the reins. You understand? How can it possible to slow down? And more significantly, given the fact that we don't have much stomach for it, do we? Honestly. Bring up the third key lesson. I'm never going to get through this. Read with me. Before we can even consider the deliberate sacrifice of self needed to step out of an unconscious nature that is always in a rush, we must realize two things. First, that not only are we not the one choosing what moves us as it does, but that as long as we remain identified with those movements, we will keep going absolutely nowhere in a hurry. Now, what are we doing in this room? We're setting up a way in which we, for a moment, can observe our mind that always thinks it's productive when it's rushing to save itself from a pain or to get to a pleasure. So we're looking at it and seeing, well, that's insane. For a moment, I know it is insane to be rushing and anxious, yes or no? But the moment's going to pass, isn't it? So I need something with me that I can begin to use so that I have a point that allows me to stay as an observer of the horse instead of the one imagining that he or she is riding it. All right? So it's a new practice. I'm going to describe it to you, then we're going to actually do it in this room. And then we'll wrap it up. And please, God, may this not only fall on your ears in a meaningful way, but please may it move into every human being who ever hears the idea and understands what it's like, the pain of being on a horse that rushes into a pit. You must learn what it means to move deliberately. To move deliberately. Now, before we get into that, what do you think it means to move deliberately? We have to contrast it. Are my movements deliberate, or is the horse moving what it does? And then I explain the horse movement, and I say, I deliberately. When you get angry at somebody and defend yourself, you would say, I deliberately did that, wouldn't you? Did you? No, you didn't. So you can see over and over again, I fall into a dark place, and my mind always has a reason why I fell in the dark place. I deliberately said those things to you. No, I didn't. The horse opened its mouth and said, nay. It spoke for me. Big, floppy, old lips. Yeah, all the time. It is impossible to act deliberately without slowing down enough to see that I'm never present to the thoughts and feelings that move me. Some of this is more shocking than I can get into in the time left. You know, you're sitting in your chair, you're driving in your car, wherever you are, you're having a conversation with somebody. Did you know that virtually everything that comes out of your mouth and almost everything that you see as the cause of your experience took place behind your eyes and behind your mind, and then the result, the effect of that reaction then became your reality. And when that reality becomes evident because it's so familiar to you in its constancy, then I appear as the one who knows what happened and where I have to go and at the speed I have to do it in order to make sure it doesn't happen again. When it didn't even happen to me. Something took place and it brought up inside of this unconscious nature a naturally required reaction. But that natural reaction turns into an unnatural urgency to escape the experience of myself because I don't understand what that reaction is about, let alone why I'm having it. So the urgency in one way, listen to one respect, the urgency in one respect is to actually escape the experience that I need so I stop trying to escape my own pain. Have I put you to sleep? If you, again, and this is, you'll see, if I, in fact, let's just do it. Here's the exercise. Get a hold of something in your hand. What you're going to do when I say go, and you can do this at home if you wish. Nobody has to do this if you think somehow or other I'm not going to do that. You idiot human beings. So even that, you're going to take what you've got in your hand, and for a moment I want you to look around the room and find a spot with your mind's eye that you are going to deliberately get out of your chair. You are going to deliberately walk over to that spot, and you're going to deliberately set down what you have in your hand on that spot. After you've deliberately put that down, you're going to deliberately walk back to your chair and deliberately sit down. What does that mean? It means the whole time I'm aware that something is getting up, something is moving, something has an intention, something is going to be aimed at, and I will drop this off. I will know that I'm putting it down. I will deliberately put it down. And then I will deliberately turn around so that instead of being an unconscious passenger on a horse, I'm going to enter into the whole mechanism of that creature and be present to everything that's moving through it, so that instead of being moved by it as I am all of the time unconsciously, I'm going to start knowing what it's like to participate in its movement. Then I can't fall off of the path, can I? Because I'm there. Another I is there that isn't the horse I. So here's the exercise. Don't take a long time. This isn't a drama. Where's Dave? This isn't a drama. Just one thing, walk over, put it down deliberately, come back, and then I want to hear about your deliberate experience. Go. I hope you're doing this at home. It'll only be meaningful if you have. Now, while people are returning to their chairs, I'll tell you something very interesting. I've never seen a group of students move slower than I just saw them move. Well, did you have to tell yourself to slow down? No, you understood that if I'm going to deliberately do something, I need to be right here with this body, with these thoughts, these feelings, these sensations. Saying, am I doing it right? I got to watch all that going on and yet still do what I intend to do deliberately. So I want to hear some of your experience. Chris. Good. Chrissy said, I was out of my chair before I knew it. So, God, I want so much for you. I want it for myself. I was out of my chair. Here we're in the atmosphere of the school, and here's a dedicated exercise to do a deliberate action. I'm out of my chair before I know it. If I'm out of my chair before I know it in this room, can you imagine what's happening to me when I'm with friends and family in my office, shopping online, daydreaming? Can you imagine it? No one is there. Who else? John. This is perfect. He said, I had a deliberate goal. I was going to someplace, but before I got there, I changed it twice. This is the law of 7, incidentally. This constant interference in an intention, changing directions. Doug. Yes. Terry. She said, once I did the first part of the deliberate act, then I fell into a state of sleep, feeling the relief that I accomplished the first part. Did you know that you returned to your chair? I did. Okay. Okay, Patricia. Because I am trying to be present. You don't have to slow down physically to be present, but for now you do. Because this is the point. I've told the story. I'm going to go a few minutes longer, guys, than ordinarily. Did I ever tell you the story of Crazy Daisy? A couple of you know. Years and years ago, I was trying to make an impression on this girl. And we went riding. We went to go horseback riding at the Griffith Park horse stables. And there was this big Italian guy, and he came out, and he said to her, well, what's your riding skill? She said, I'm terrified, she said. He said, no problem, I've got the perfect horse for you. He said to me, what's your riding skill? I said, well, I'm basically a master. Not in those words, but I alluded to the fact, which was almost kind of true. I'd been working with horses for a long time, that I really knew how to ride a horse. And he said, it's like, oh, no problem. He said, I got just a horse for you. And so he gave me a horse, and we go riding out, and we left at 11:30, and we're supposed to be back at 12:30. Halfway through at 12 o'clock, I'm damned if that horse didn't know it went 12:01, and it turned on its hooves and ran back at 1,000 miles an hour towards the stable on concrete. And there came a certain place where the turn was going to be made by a horse galloping with hooves on concrete. And I'm thinking, my life is completely over. And when she got there, I jumped off. I hurt myself. I jumped off, not to mention being so embarrassed. So I hobbled my way back to the stable. I said, I thought you said this was a great horse. He said, that's a Crazy Daisy, he said. That's a perfect horse for you. And he was right. You don't know that you're living with Crazy Daisy. That it already knows where it needs to be, what it needs to do, how it needs to get there. It knows everything that's waiting for it in imagination, and it's always running towards that or away from whatever threatens that imagination. So that when you understand that this idea that I have to actually understand, as difficult as it is, and I don't want to understand it, that if I act deliberately, if I reach over and I deliberately put a cup down, or I deliberately pick up my water, that in that moment, the only way it's possible for me to take a deliberate action is for me to consciously separate from the actions of the horse, of this unconscious nature that already knows the speed of everything. You walk deliberately. If you walk deliberately, even just with the intention of it, you will slow down a little bit. You know why you'll slow down a little bit? Because you are no longer moving at the unconscious speed of a sleeping nature. Now you are moving with the observation of that nature, and it affects that nature that does not want to be observed. And that's the pain in it. It already has its speed for everything. You're just not aware of it because you're riding along. You're in the waves of thoughts and feelings. Anybody upsets you, One day you'll see it. Your thoughts move at exactly the same speed they always do when that happens. And then as you try to think through how to rush the urgency out of that situation and get to a resting place, your thoughts move even faster. But you're not aware of the speed of thought because that I is running with it. When you have a dedicated intention to watch, to walk, to do something, to move from your chair, to go into the living room, to reach over and pick up the control machine, whatever they call that thing, a clicker, a remote, thank you. You pick up your phone. Every last one of those things that you do deliberately. I was working on this with my golf swing. Deliberate. Why? So that I'm not remanded over to a wild horse. And by the way, it is the wild horse that judges the wild horse every time. All right, I got to get to an end here. Are you understanding this idea of a deliberate action? Here are 3 ways in which I would urge you to consider this process of what we've described, and then you find your own way. Number 1, as often as you are reminded to do so, remember to deliberately slow down. You're not trying to slow your body down. When I say whenever you're reminded to do so, because you have to be reminded. You won't remind yourself. Do you think a horse reminds itself? It reminds itself of the straw waiting in the bale back home. It reminds itself of what it has to run to or run away from. As often as you can, as often you're reminded, you remember, you know what? I am going to deliberately, and here's one example. I do this in the morning. I'm going to deliberately finish as completely as I can whatever I'm doing in that moment. If I'm making my coffee, I deliberately deliberately slow my body down. Because what's it want to do? What does my body want to do? It wants to rush, get all that done, so that it can dream about the pleasure it's going to have when it's done perking, and go sit in its chair and hope that somebody shows up to deliver the coffee to me. Do you understand? I deliberately turn on the spigot. I even have my own extra. You all should have your own extra. Whenever I walk by my refrigerator or my stove, I deliberately just touch it to remind me to be deliberate. As deliberately as you can, finish what you're doing. And then when all is said and done, because I'm out of town, see you later. Deliberately start over with your practice of making a deliberate new start. You will see parts of yourself revolt. You'll see parts of you don't have, can you imagine, parts of you don't have the stomach to be aware of themselves. It is that discovery that gives you the encouragement and the need to be more deliberate in your life. What a nice thing. Little Buck was pretty deliberate. Never rushed. Every action drove me crazy. Deliberate. Learn what it means to live more deliberately, and you will slow down naturally as a result. As you slow down, you will see the horse that's always running the course that leads to the pit that you fall in. Let's take a break.
right, I think we're good to go. Wait for the high sign from my team. Yeah, good, okay. All right, thanks everyone. We're gonna start with our second part of class now, which is a time for you to talk with Guy if you wish, or ask a question. Of course, you know if you're in the room, you can come up to the mic and do that. If you're online, you can, in GoToWebinar, you can actually speak with Guy directly just by clicking or tapping your hand icon, and that will let me know that you wish to speak with Guy. You can also put a question in the comment area. I do have a couple questions that have already come in, which is great. If you're on Facebook or YouTube, I'll also cycle around and see if I can pick up questions from there as well. So we have about 20 minutes, and I don't have any other announcements, so I think we can just go ahead and get started. Guy, do you want to start with anything, or should we just get...
No, I think I used more than my allotted time.
All right, I'm going to read a question that came in from Chris. He's watching with us today on GoToWebinar. Here's what he says. Hi, Guy, this is Chris. You mentioned previously about not suffering, but that we like to suffer. The mind creates the problem, we suffer, and the mind creates a solution, and it goes on in a circle. I wanted to ask you about suffering. The Bible mentions several examples about suffering and how it is part of the circle of life and rebirth. I lost my wife 3 months ago and obviously miss her tremendously. I find myself in depression, suffering. I think you stated previously that there is useless suffering. I can understand useless suffering, but regarding a loss like this, is it useless? I am trying to understand suffering and its purpose, perhaps related to biblical examples. Thanks, Guy. Chris.
There's probably 3 or 4 significant talking points to your question, Chris. I'll start with the simplest and most obvious. I'm sorry for your loss. But I think we have to understand in the highest possible way what loss is. And why, without being analytical or philosophical. It says, for instance, that one must lose their life to find it. We begin, Chris, by looking at the first part of your question, where you say that I have said that we like to suffer. What I have said is that there is clearly a part of us that likes to suffer, but that it isn't I. It belongs to an order of an unconscious nature that, with no say presently on our part, becomes entangled with what it is imagined, attached to that entanglement, and then lives suffering any time that what it has imagined itself as needing and being is threatened. In the Bible, it also speaks of a peace that passes understanding, Chris. What is this peace that passes understanding, and what does it have to do with this suffering that I'm going through regarding the loss of my wife? If you can reach for it, the peace that passes understanding means that there is a peace that has no dependency on anything that is understood. There is a peace that has no dependency on anything that is understood, meaning on any thought, any image, let alone any identity connected to that thought. The peace that passes understanding has no object to it. Our present level of development, we are nothing but identified and dependent upon every object that completes the sense of ourselves as the subject in that relationship. Now, how can I say all that more simply? It's impossible to observe oneself without understanding the need to do so, Chris. I'm sure that you can see this, and perhaps everyone in the room who's had any kind of similar experience. When the thought of my wife who has passed, when I see her picture on the mantle, or I recognize her closet still has the clothes in it, the drawer is still full of her things, people who don't know are calling. In those moments, there is pure suffering with no awareness at all of everything that is validating the need to be in pain. Anything that validates the need to be in pain is part of the useless process of suffering, whatever that pain may be. So it requires having some separation, being able to look and see, you know what? Something in me says, and you even said it, I find myself in depression and suffering. You know, Chris, some people suffer in that depression for their whole lifetime and over a far less issue than the loss of one's wife. And I think the last thing I would say, if it can summarize any of those comments, is that it's a mistake to try to understand suffering. It's a mistake. Because the only way that the mind wants to understand suffering is by thinking about what it's suffering over. That's the only way it can do it. So the mind trying to escape the suffering of separation, I've lost someone that I love, actually brings up the thing that I've lost and then creates suffering that it says it wants to come to an end of, but it doesn't know how. So it's in seeing that kind of thing, Chris. In some respects, and I know this is hard to understand, it is a lucky man or woman who, having principles to work with to understand this kind of pain, allows them to assume, at least momentarily, a certain state of impersonal witnessing of these things so that I can see, you know, this is amazing. Why does my mind keep bringing up the very thing that when it does, brings me down? Why is it doing that? But if I let the answer come from the horse, then of course it's going to say, because you've lost someone. But I didn't bring up the fact that I've remembered my wife is gone. Now this is fairly fresh, Chris. You have to go through this. I'm just saying, stop trying to figure it out. The more you try to figure it out, the more it dominates the mind that is caught up trying to reconcile itself. Just suffer. Just suffer. But do it as quietly and as impersonally as you can. Observe the sufferer instead of identifying with the suffering. Observe the sufferer instead of identifying with the suffering. You can do that to some extent, can't he? Everybody knows that. I can observe this, but then the next thing I know, I'm in the pit. I intended to understand, not by thinking about this state, but by observing it. I intended to learn something about this nature, and I intended to dedicate myself deliberately to observe it, and the next thing I know, I'm off the cliff. But that's a gift. I was asleep. I didn't even see myself go to sleep. Didn't even catch the thought that spurred the repeat of the suffering that I was in. You do all that. You ask God to help you understand. And I promise you, Chris, this suffering, as terrible as it is, will prove a true stepping stone in the development of what is authentically loving in you. Nobody wants to lose anybody they love. My wife and I are now in our 70s. I'm going to be 76 in a few months. How long does it go on? How long can you keep up a life? How long do you want to keep up a life? But then you realize, I don't want to spend a day without my wife. I know she doesn't. She absolutely says she has to go before I do. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that happens. I'm serious. There are things that you have, maybe you don't know it yet, but there are things that you have certain capacity for. Pain understood is profitable. Pain understood properly is profitable because you begin through the awareness of it to explore parts of a nature that on one hand can't bear the discontinuation of all that they have been contented with, and on the other hand, the discovery, Chris, the discovery that there is a contentment that supersedes the conditions. There is a peace that surpasses the possibilities that this mind has created for itself and clings to. That's the best I can do.
Well, I noticed that the spur...
Hello, my name is...
My name is Steve. I noticed that the spur was trying to spur me to slow down.
Watch your step. It was a kind of koan that he spoke of. What he was saying is that what is the spur other than desire? That's what the spur is. Want and not want. And there can't be want or not want without an I that feels it needs to become something or do something. And if you didn't mean that, I take full credit for it.
All right, we have a question that came in from James. James says, does this verse from Galatians apply to the deliberate exercise? And here's the verse. Now I am saying, walk in spirit, and you should under no circumstances be consummating the lust of the flesh.
In that language, that is exactly what they were saying. Now I am saying, walk in spirit. Now I am saying, let me be fully present. In the presence moment. Deliberately in the presence moment, and suffering the parts of myself that don't want to be in the present moment because they can't stand the light of it, let alone they can't wait till they get someplace where they can finally put all their problems to sleep. Anything else? Oh. He said wanting to get to the end of class.
I have two more comments.
Okay, no problem.
Or questions, I should say. Okay, so here's a question that came in from Patricia. And let me send it over to you, Guy. I haven't had a chance to read this.
No worries.
But here it is.
Look, everybody, be like little Buck. When I grow up, I want to be like little Buck. In perfect unity with the movement of everything around him. Never rushing, and yet capable at the drop of a hat, moving at the speed of light. That's what we want, is to live a life without urgency, and you'll never know a life without urgency until you see the nature in thought constantly pursuing its own safety. Go ahead.
Good reminder. Thank you.
Yes.
All right, this is from Patricia. Guy, I'm caught between grief and compassion, especially during the past year. I'm caught in caring and moving on. It's difficult to suffer in the past and future worries.
I was making some notes today about the idea of order. Because part of, not today, but when I watch my friends in nature, the world that we see out there that we're so often completely unaware of is always in perfect order. What is timeless is in perfect order. Creation is in perfect order. And there's no urgency in creation. We don't know anything about participating in creation because we're too busy in a hurry to create the world that we imagine we'll be safe in. But when, as we talked about, this idea of entering into not just what I see, but the awareness of what I see, and bringing all of that, all of my parts into that moment, in that moment, I'm in another world. It's perfectly ordered. This is what's so fascinating about your spiritual life. One day you'll understand, I've always been in a world that's perfectly ordered, but I have been perfectly out of order because I'm identified with everything that tells me the order I need to create so I can be at peace. Peace is order. Order is peace. It's already here. That's what God is. Perfect order. Perfect peace. That's what love is. Perfect order, perfect peace. You're in it. You just don't know you're in it because you're trying to make it. And Patricia, I said what I said because you need to see that as long as you struggle to escape these opposites, whatever you're calling them, grief and compassion, past, present, caring and moving on, until you understand that the horse is always stuck in between these opposites, half of it here, half of it there, trying to struggle with this to get it to be like that. Till you understand that, you'll be struggling. You will be uselessly suffering for nothing. Just see how out of order it is for you to suffer over what you have no control over. See how out of order it is for you to struggle and suffer over what you have no control over. And the more you can see with clarity that it is useless to suffer over what my mind has created, then you will stop participating in what that mind creates and enter into this more perfect creation where peace is already a part of its movement.
Ready?
Yeah.
I have a question from CN on YouTube, and Guy, I'm not able to send it over to you.
Okay.
So pay attention. Sorry, I guess that wasn't funny.
She didn't mean to say it. It was unconscious.
All right, so here's from CN. Guy, sometimes when I listen to your teachings, I get the sense that I should be able to drop all fear immediately, as though it could just dissolve on the spot. However, for me, the more I think about and engage with the idea of fear, the more I seem to feel it inside. It almost feels like I need to investigate this fear further instead of simply letting it go. Am I misunderstanding something? Or is it part of the process to explore the fear before it can truly be released? Thank you.
I like the question. It indicates you're working. It seems like a paradox, but you can't really let go of anything. It's impossible until you want to understand it more than you want the understanding of it. What does that mean? To paraphrase what you've said, wouldn't it be wiser to study this fear than to try and let it go? Where's the contradiction in the study of something and the impersonal observation of it? They aren't opposites, they're connected to one another. They belong to each other. You must never try to let go of a fear. That means there's you who believes there's a fear and something that you need to do about it, which, by the way, you're always in a hurry to do. No. CN, is that like capital cat? It's cinnamon. Oh, so okay. Cinnamon nerd. Is there more after this? Okay. We'll go home right now after this. So I was thinking about a prism. You all know what a prism is? Prism is a crystal of some kind that when light enters into it, something about the nature of the organization of those crystals inside of that gem takes and reveals that that light that's coming into it isn't this invisible light that we see, but rather that that light is made up of 7 principal colors, what we call the rainbow, and that that rainbow itself has a series of fractal colors, and it is ad infinitum in terms of the range of the vibration of light. Now, without understanding it yet, you are at once the light that comes in, you are the prism, and you are the realization of all the characters and qualities that that part of your consciousness reveals when an event enters into it. But for us, when an event enters into it, it separates itself out into the 7 sins. It becomes instantaneously a fear, a worry, a doubt, a greed, a need, whatever it may be. Do you understand what I'm saying? The energy comes in, the event takes place. The event that you see is what your mind has called the moment. The event is the intersection of an impossible number of characters and qualities, and they enter into this consciousness. And when they do, suddenly all I see, because that's what's dominating me, is the color of fear, the color of anxiety, the color of guilt, the color of doubt, the color of anger. I just see one ray as that consciousness as it's acted on and it exits that, meaning it reveals the character of that consciousness, then I think that's the whole of my character. Don't you? And when I think that my anxiety or my fear is the whole of my character, and that character wants nothing to do with the pain it's in, then it gets into a hurry, doesn't it, to try to figure out what to do about this revelation of this consciousness. Well, what if you really understood that what you're looking at and experiencing, what you call your character, wanted or not wanted, is merely one of these colors that this prism called consciousness makes evident to you? Then you'd realize it's just a color. It's just a fear. That's what you don't get yet. It's just a fear. It's not your fear, because every human being has the same prism, except we're locked in a prison of identifying with every color that comes through that consciousness, because we identify with it because we don't know what else to do, because that nature of that horse has to exist. It has to have reins, a saddle, and it has to have a destination. That's that nature. That's not your nature. You get that? We'll go into that more deeply. We'll get a prism up here and experiment. Good night.